Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for coming, thank you so much for watching, and especially a big thank you to the sponsors of the channel. I truly appreciate it. You are the reason that this channel is still operational and I'm still filming videos. Thank you very much indeed. As we promised in the last video, let's talk a little bit about the other wrecks. I gave you the background to the beginning of the studies of Ottoman seafaring in the region, but today we will talk about the large numbers of boats that we discovered during the Black Sea map, and most of all we will concentrate on the URDOVIZA excavation. I will show you a few of the images from the Black Sea wrecks, and you will see the great variety, and yet you can also definitely see the family resemblance to the vessels. Some of them vary in rigs, some of them vary in overall shape of the vessel, but most are pretty similar. By far, the overwhelming number of these vessels had one mast with a mix fore and aft and square rigging, but there are a few that appear to have been what can be identified as Saik or Shaike, and they are described also by contemporary Western artists. We have records of such vessels from at least the 17th century, early 17th century, all the way into the 19th century, into the days of photography. And it is interesting how little these vessels have changed in rig or really in overall shape. As I said in a previous video, they do not differ too vastly from the early medieval Byzantine vessels in shape. With all the wrecks that we found at great depth, that were exposed on the bottom, that had their rigs surviving, and this is what really makes them so incredibly valuable, the interesting part is that the frames are still standing. However, the planking is all gone. The iron of the iron fasteners is completely eaten up. So we, always full of respect for the past and for dead people and for the tragedy that these wrecks after all represent, we nicknamed them the IKEA wrecks. Because just like a kit from IKEA furniture, you have all the bits and pieces there, but you have to assemble it yourself. And that is how our vessels were too. That includes the rig. There were details of the rig that no one had really paid attention to. And it is only in retrospect that we started seeing evidence for them in the works of artists, contemporary, especially 18th, beginning of the 19th century Western artists, but also at least two 17th century sources that eventually I will be talking about it, but when I submit the book for publication. So, we have at least one two-masted vessel. We have a few that may have had a second mast. It is problematic how to interpret it. We have lateen-rigged vessels, we have square-rigged vessels, we have fore and aft rigged sprit rigged vessels. All of this is well attested in contemporary images within Ottoman archaeology. At least one of these vessels is heavily carved with flowery designs, so inevitably it was called the flower wreck by the crew. And it is only now at the URDOVIZA that we see another heavily carved ship again. So these are great, they're interesting, but there is one problem with all of them. With all these ships, we are seeing the parts that we never find in archaeology. We see the top sides, we see their decks, and thank God for that. We can see distribution of hatches. We can see on at least two of the wrecks the hatch covers. On another two of the wrecks, we can see the capstans. We can see anchors. We can see all sorts of detail that normally is not visible in archaeology. But these vessels are at depths anywhere from a few hundred meters to 2,000 meters depth in the Black Sea. This certainly has contributed to their preservation, but at the same time it is also given us a very significant challenge. We can document the upper parts of the ships, no problem. They're visible. Photogrammetry, thank you very much, that can do it. The problem is that we cannot extract information about the bottoms of these vessels, or it is very, very limited information. We can see how the frames are oriented, we can see how they're going down into the bottom, but the actual bottom is not visible because it is buried in the mud. That is the limitation of deep sea archaeology, unless you figure out how to excavate. Considering that operations of the ship cost about $150,000 per day for such deep work, I believe that it will be quite a while before anyone is interested in funding excavation of vessels that are unique and highly important for our understanding of seafaring, merchant activities, trade, development of the early modern Europe. But so be it. So these vessels are going to give us a lot. They're giving us the variety of vessels that were used. They're giving us the rigs that we have only archaeology to trust for this, because I'm not aware of any documents in the Ottoman archives that speak of rig proportions. There may be some, but no one has ever published any or indicated the existence of shipbuilding treatises, the way we do for the Mediterranean world or the West. So they're valuable, highly valuable. A lot of the book is going to be dedicated to them and to studying what is available, what information they can provide us. The other wreck that I would like to share with you now is the one that we are currently excavating. And because we're supposed to submit a report in a few days to the Bulgarian Archaeological Institute before we can be issued a permit to continue the excavation. So this is why I have given priority to this model. And the last few days I have been playing with trying to model some of the bits and pieces of this ship. So this is the stern that you're seeing here. If you follow my cursor, this is the stern post of the vessel. I have yet to build a three-dimensional model of it. What you see here in these off-whitish, light grayish lines is indicating the series of whales on the ship. And yes, you're correct, you can see here at least three. They're actually remnants of 4 levels of whales. And many of them, as you can see, are continuing down and would have been under the water line for most of the length. What is interesting, this is a difference between this ship and the Kitten shipwreck, which is slightly earlier. This one, Dendrochronology for once was kind enough to provide me a date. And let me show you which of these timbers, actually. I'll show you if my fingers start working. But this frame over here yielded a date of most likely being cut shortly after 1827. So this is quite a late example of the vessel. But what is interesting, differs from the earlier Kitten shipwreck, is look at the whales. They follow a very specific pattern. There are 2 whales, 1 normal plank, 2 whales, 1 normal plank for the entire length of the vessel, or for the entire height of the side. After this lowermost level, the ends of these whales are notched around the stern post at the top, and here it is visible. You can see the notch. This held the stern post inside as we have seen similar construction in 16th century wrecks in the Baltic, where the whales hold the entire stern post, or stem actually, also. Just we have not reached the stem here. Probably the same will be observed there. The planking is nailed to every frame, 2 nails per frame. We have found down here in not yet drawn and shown part of the stern post, we have found the pinto, or rather the brackets, the cheeks that held the pinto in place. The pinto itself is broken, but we do have an example from the other Kitten shipwreck that is about less than 100 meters away from this one, actually. What is interesting is here in the 3D model you can see the stringers And again, the stringers inside are doubled, which was not the case with the kitten ship. There they were of single planks. These doubled stringers match exactly the whales on the outside, so they are essentially sandwiching the frames between them. The more interesting feature of the stern of the area, stern area of the vessel is. Let me see if I can change the view to the point where we can see it more clearly. Look at this humongous stern hook. I suppose it is essentially a crutch-shaped, Y-shaped timber that is holding the sides. It is acting as a diagonal brace. The upper end here is bracing against the stern post and was once upon a time fastened to it. The arms are supporting the frames downwards. Under it, maybe a foot and a half, 45 centimeters or so under it, there is another exactly the same hook that is supporting the stern post. Here you can see the planks on the other side. And there were two diagonal braces also right here. Diagonal riders is what I call them. We could see, even before excavation, we could see the deck surviving in this area over here. And we anticipated that this deck continues all the way throughout the length of the vessel, because towards the bow we see evidence of deck again when the sand shifts. But last season we reached the through beam, the second through beam in the vessel. Both of these protrude through the sides of the vessel. Well, actually, this one does not quite protrude, but close enough. This one does protrude completely through the sides, like a medieval vessel. There with extreme crown. On top of the beam here, there was a second layer of beams, a little bit narrower down here, which essentially formed the waterproof bulkhead towards the open hold of the vessel. And this is what was interesting, to see that there never was any deck in this area. This is 6 meters long area, and we were lucky enough to see what the cargo of the vessel was in this area. You can see it very well arranged here, still in situ, still as the stevedores, or probably the crew itself, loaded the timber. It was carrying timber, and it is completely full. The height of the vessel, in just a moment I will rotate it and I'll show you, is at least 4.5 meters. So the depth in hold is just about 4-ish, 4 and a little over. The sides here are braced. The lack of beams in this area is compensated slightly by these two knees. Enormous knee over here that is hook scarfed, actually nib flat scarf, with another knee that is right here. You can see it. They are also notched around the frames, so they lock into the frames and add stiffness to the side of the vessel. Interestingly, they are not horizontal, they're at a slight angle. That angle follows the camber of the beams both fore and aft, even though they are slightly below. Here under this beam, there is a bulkhead that has an opening in the central part, and you can see this timber has gone through the opening. So we suspect that once we remove the deck planking here and excavate this area in the coming season, we're going to find quite a lot of artifacts there. In this area, in the very back, there were two levels of soles. We were excavating the cabin sole initially, which is at about this level, probably 30 to 40 centimeters below the sand level, below the bottom. And we thought that's it. And we have found the cabin sole, we excavated, and that's that. After that will be the hold. We removed it, and under it there is another. So about 5 feet, 1.6 meters actually below, there was a second sole. And under it, there is some planking. We still have not reached the very bottom of the vessel to record the floor timbers. I suspect that they are natural grown crutches, because that's how it was on the other kitten shipwreck. And because if they could afford to spend their time and timber supplies on such a huge stern hook, there is bound to be enough timber for clutches. This combination of knees that is supporting the side is also repeated, of course, on the starboard side of the ship, but it is less visible because of all the timber that has shifted on top here. Right in this area on the deck, there was a hatch. The hatch is directly above and behind the entrance into the bulkhead. And over here, on the rear beam, we found remnants, maybe an inch or two high remnants, 35 millimeter thick oak planks that were oriented vertically and almost certainly were the front end of the bulkhead that closed off the stern cabin of the vessel. This is beginning to be quite a complicated structure, quite interesting architecture of the vessel, and it must be said that it is something that we're seeing in iconography. I'm really looking forward to finishing this vessel. I began it mostly to keep the crew together, as just so that we do another project together until we're looking for an older, more interesting wreck. But I have to admit, and please don't quote me in public, because I'll deny ever saying this, I'm finding it exciting and interesting, not for any other reason, but just for the curious architecture of the vessel. It is quite clear that here the frames, also just as on the Kitten shipwreck, are cut to exactly the same arc. And that is interesting and important, because this is talking about a hull molding system developed in the Middle Ages, really, and used way beyond the point where any other maritime culture was still using this shape. And as Costa Damianis has demonstrated in his dissertation and his publications, this is a system of hull molding continued to be used by the traditional vernacular Greek boat builders all the way into the beginning of the second half of the 20th century, really. So it's quite interesting. Furthermore, no lesser man than Chappell himself, Howard Chappell, studied Turkish traditional fishing boats on the Black Sea, the southern coast of the Black Sea, in the 1950s as part of the UNESCO programs on food supplies. And he suggested that just looking at the boats reminds him of the hull molding system of galley construction. I believe he had a point there. And the final thing that I'll bring to your attention before we close this already extremely long video, as I'm being told, is that the shape of the planking over here, the shape of the vessel really changes rapidly. You can almost see it here. Oh, here the frames are straight upwards. Here, look at how sharp is the angle. From the normal rising, they suddenly spread out. And if you trace the angle of these planks, there is very little way that you can bring them to end into the rabbet of the stern post, or an extension of the stern post, which indicates that unlike the Kitten ship and most of the wrecks that we found in deep water, this vessel almost certainly had a transom stern rather than a sharp double-ended stern. And this will be real fun to reconstruct, because that will have to be done the old traditional way by cutting bits and pieces of wood or cardboard, as the case may be, and actually extending the planking up to see at least the lower part of the transom, how it was fitted. I am very much looking forward to this part of the exercise. And yes, as far as we have reached, this will be in the book. There really are going to be three books produced from with slightly different audience. The one is going to be mostly a picture book specifically for the Turkish Institute of Nautical Archaeology, and telling the stories of the expeditions and what we have learned, but it is aimed more at the general public. I am planning a purely scholarly book that is going to have all my reconstructions, all my technical interpretation of the sites, that will be published hopefully by an American university press, academic press. That may be of use to some extent of shipmodelers, but shipmodelers are not the public that I am aiming at. It is other maritime archaeologists. And then finally, there are some plans that are discussed with a famous American publisher that does cater to shipmodelers specifically, Of course, I am speaking of Sea-Watch Books in the United States, Captain Mike, and I have been in discussions. Nothing is yet on paper. It is a little bit longer project because obviously it requires also a model to go hand in hand with the book, but eventually it will be produced and will give the opportunity to modelers to construct a model of a unique vessel that is that up to this point has never been modeled, of a type that is rarely, if ever, modeled at all, from a very little known region, and yet it is very much a real ship, very well enough preserved to leave us very little room for hesitation in reconstructing its shape, a vessel of which we are learning quite a bit, actually, as we are moving forward. I am looking forward to seeing these things produced, hopefully before I drop dead from old age, which at the pace at which I'm working seems to be imminent. So, ladies and gentlemen, with this, I thank you very, very much for your attention. I am very grateful, especially to the generous sponsors of this channel. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you soon again. Good night.